Many thanks to the organizers for the invitation to come participate in these lightning talks. I apologize that my presentation will have to be pre-recorded, but I'm currently at my Airbnb in New York for the summer, and the Wi-Fi is spotty, to be generous. So today I want to talk to you about my attempt at introducing a relatively new subfield of classics, ancient history, archaeology, archaeogaming, into one of the most traditional, I believe, classes that we can have in a classics department, Intermediate Greek, or more specifically Intermediate Greek 3, which here at the University of Chicago revolves around Homer. They give us free license to include whatever book of the Iliad or the Odyssey that we want. So I picked book 6 because it has 3 commentaries that the students could use. DCC, Jeffrey Stedman used sparingly, and the green and yellow. So there was a nice little cross-pollination that we could do with commentaries. I'm a historian by training, so I not only wanted to go over and teach Homeric grammar and syntax and meter and all that, but I also wanted to elevate the text itself by looking at Greco-Roman reception of the Iliad. So I looked at a lot of material culture, inscriptions, coins, what have you. I also looked at a little bit of course, pre-classical Mycenaean palaces and all that to try to, again, situate the text as much as possible. But in addition to that, I wanted to talk about modern receptions because their final project, instead of a final exam, was their own adaptation or translation of a particular portion of Book 6. So throughout the class, every week we would talk about a different translation or adaptation. So we started, for example, with Alexander Pope, then Caroline Alexander, Lombardo, Klein, and then later on we switched on over to more adaptations, and we talked about, of course, the Troy movie, an Iliad, a wonderful play, and for week 7, I believe, the students had the option to either look at Troy, A Total War Saga, which is a real-time strategy game, or they could look at the Marvel Illustrated rendition of the Iliad. I was very hesitant about just doing Troy because I didn't know how my students would feel about video games, but I was actually very surprised that half of the students, although albeit I had 8, but still half of them actually sought to engage with Troy and talk about how the game treats the ancient material. So that's what I want to go over in class today. Here are just some screenshots of the game. Note it's a mixture of grand strategy, so managing cities and all that, but also on the ground actually managing troops. So you have both of those, just for some context. I was heavily indebted to History Respawned, this wonderful series by Bob Whitaker. They had Dr. Kate Cook on, and they had a wonderful Let's Play on YouTube. It's still up. Hour long. I kind of gave timestamps to my students, and they could pick from whatever sections and hear about the game, in addition to watching trailers and other Let's Plays of the game without commentary. So my students very quickly picked up on a couple of things. One of the most interesting ones is that in the game, you can select 3 campaigns. You have the historical campaign, which is purportedly grounded in reality. You have truth behind the myth, which takes some liberties. For example, the Minotaur is, instead of, the Minotaur is just a big hairy guy with a bovine skull. So they kind of try to tease out what it could possibly have been referencing to. And then the mythological is just straight up giants and centaurs and all that. But my students picked up on this reputation that Troy has of straddling both historicity and myth, wonderfully exhibited by the recent exhibition at the British Museum, which bears the title Myth and Reality. So it's really interesting to see how, from the outset of a campaign, you already get to make those choices as a player. Notably on the battlefield, Homeric heroes can duel. There's actually a duel mechanic where the armies can meet and then they kind of make space for the 2 heroes of each opposing army to clash. mimicking again the ancient text. And note here, we did book 6, and book 6 is hot off the heels of Diomedes' Aristea. Note that the game actually implements an Aristea hero ability that gives immense buffs to that particular hero after a brief cooldown. So again, really interesting to see how you have a meter for Aristea that is reflected in the text. Book 6 also has that wonderful / horrid scene where Menelaus captures a Trojan warrior, and then the warrior pleads for his life and offers the goods at his father's palace in exchange for his life. Note how that's reflected in the actual post-battle screen here. For captives that you take, you can barter their lives, which is the option that is highlighted there. You can just kill them, or you can recruit them into your forces. Again, just different ways that what the text brings out is then extrapolated into the greater game mechanics. We talked a lot about Hector, particularly the Hector's faction in the game, because Hector, of course, features prominently in Book 6. We talked about his armor. Note here, of course, the horsehair crest that Astaniax famously is scared by, and also his shield that is described in a wonderfully torturous. The Greek is a bit of a mess in that section where the shield hits the back of his neck and the back of his ankles. What's really neat also, we discussed the values of the Homeric heroes, how they're seen as shepherds to their flock. And especially Hector, he's the leader of the Trojans and also the allies. And note that there's a game mechanic here called the Aswan League. The more land your allies control, the more positive effects your armies will receive. So my students picked up on the emphasis in the text and then how it's brought out and fleshed out into an actual game mechanic in this game. There's also the notion of divine will, so you can sacrifice hecatombs in the game and raise your standing with whatever god. They each grant different bonuses. For example, Ares makes your troops better. Again, not only a superficial take on, the granting of hecatombs, prayers to the gods, but shows greater notions of the do des, the reciprocity that's inherent in a lot, that undergirds a lot of the religious action in the Iliad. And this is the one that I'm really fascinated by. Helen, we talked a lot about Helen's agency. I brought in, for example, Gorgias's encomium, Ovid's retellings, and here in Troy Total War, Helen is very passive. She is a game mechanic. She only has 3 moods: lonely, gloomy, happy. You can raise them by having Paris be in close proximity to her, so a very positive relation that they have depicted here. And the happier she gets, the more bonuses you get for your territories. So again, Helen is gamified into this passive agent to be used by the player in this way. And my students really clung on to this. We had a solid discussion about Helen's portrayal, not only in Antiquity, but then in modernity using this. So that's all the time I have. I want to go through the takeaways, how I can further this discussion, how I can flesh it out in future classes, especially bringing in more archaeogaming material. Although from a look, it hasn't been officially, I believe it's August that it comes out, Women in Classical Video Games, but they don't seem to have a chapter devoted to Total War. I would love to write something on it, maybe in the introduction or once I get my hands on it, I can better say. Also, guided Let's Plays are always fun. I hope maybe in a future class to have to make my own. This is a very again, I didn't know how it would receive, so I didn't know how much resources to put in, but it was incredibly well received. So I think in the future, I could also incorporate different game labs that seem to be popping up, not only at the University of Chicago, but in other universities, to have the students actually play through. I think that would be a wonderful opportunity. So again, archaeogaming used here to elevate the text to get students thinking about greater questions, not only in modern receptions of the text, but in ancient receptions of the text. Again, Helen being the particular case study that I wanted to underscore in this very brief presentation. So thank you so much. I look forward to the Q&A.